Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. If we were to make a list of the most unpleasant characters in the Harry Potter universe, Rita Skeeter would undoubtedly be among the first. Her biting style, scandalous articles, and talent for twisting facts made her almost universally hated. But if we set emotions aside and look a little deeper, even in a character like Rita, we can find something good. Today, let's highlight a few points that might make us treat her with at least a little more warmth. Enjoy the video. Number 1, she had a unique sense of style. Crocodile skin handbags, flashy jeweled glasses, meticulously styled bleached blonde hair. All of it created her bright, memorable image. Yes, Rita was far from the most pleasant person, but you can't deny her ability to present herself. She always stood out and brought an element of extravagance into the wizarding world. Number 2, becoming an animagus was a clever move. Let's be honest, mastering such advanced magic as becoming an animagus is an achievement in itself. In the 20th century, only a handful of animagi were officially registered, which shows how difficult it is. Rita learned to transform into a beetle, which allowed her to eavesdrop on secret conversations and gather scoops. Morally questionable? Definitely. But as a strategic move, flawless. Number 3, she was genuinely good at her job. Rita knew how to capture an audience's attention. Scandalous articles, sharp questions, the ability to dig up information by any means. All of this made her a true star of wizarding journalism. Yes, her methods were dirty, but the truth is, people read her work, newspapers sold, and editors were happy. Number 4, she helped Harry. In Order of the Phoenix, it was Rita who agreed to interview Harry for the Quibbler. And even though her consent came only because Hermione blackmailed her, the result was useful. Harry's story became widely known, which played an important role in the fight against the Ministry of Magic and its propaganda. In this case, she ended up doing the right thing, even if her motives were far from noble. Number 5, sometimes she stood up for the right things. Before turning her attention to Harry, Rita worked on other investigations, and some of them had a fairly noble undertone. For example, she demanded answers from the Ministry about the fate of the missing Bertha Jorkins. Perhaps it was just an excuse to stir up a scandal, but given Voldemort's growing influence, such publications were at least some form of truth. Number 6, she could see the hidden details. Rita Skeeter had eyes like a hawk. She could catch the smallest shift in tone or a flicker of discomfort, then spin it into a story. During the Triwizard Tournament, she saw how nervous Harry looked before the first task. Instead of describing stage fright, she twisted it into drama, writing, "Harry Potter, pale and trembling, shows signs of strain as the pressure mounts." Others saw a boy preparing for dragons. Rita saw a chance to turn his fear into a headline. Her sharpness showed again with Hermione. Rita noticed Victor Crumb's quiet attention to her in the library and instantly smelled a story. To most students, it was nothing more than a visiting champion spending time with a friend. To Rita, it became scandal. She exaggerated it into the line about Hermione toying with both Harry Potter's and Victor Crumb's affections. The detail was small, but she plucked it out, magnified it, and made it unforgettable. That was her gift, and her curse. Rita's ability to see hidden things gave her power over people who wanted to keep their lives private. It made her feared, even hated, but also respected as someone who noticed what others ignored. She could dig beneath the surface, finding secrets others preferred to bury. And whether people liked it or not, she forced those secrets into the open for all to see. Number 7, she never gave up. Rita Skeeter was the kind of person who refused to disappear. Even when Hermione exposed her as an unregistered animagus and trapped her in a glass jar, Rita didn't collapse in defeat. She endured humiliation, but she bided her time. In Order of the Phoenix, Hermione kept her under control with sharp warnings, yet Rita still looked for cracks in the prison around her. Her stubborn glare in those moments showed that she wasn't finished. Her comeback proved her resilience. When Harry needed his side of the story told, Hermione forced Rita to write the article for the Quibbler. At first, Rita resisted. "The Prophet wouldn't touch this," she sneered. But when Hermione reminded her about the illegal beetle form, Rita's survival instinct clicked. She agreed, wrote the piece, and Harry's story spread across the wizarding world. Even when cornered, she found a way to keep her pen moving. That episode showed something vital. Rita wasn't just a scandalmonger, she was a survivor. Public hatred didn't silence her. Political pressure didn't erase her name. She bent when she had to, but she always returned to the page. The very fact that Hermione chose her for the article revealed how deeply Rita was tied to the pulse of wizarding journalism. No one else could spread words so fast. Her persistence was irritating to her enemies, but it was also impressive. In a world where Voldemort's shadow grew darker and fear silenced many, Rita refused to vanish. She might have been dishonest, manipulative, even cruel, but she stayed alive in the game. That refusal to give up made her one of the most enduring voices in wizarding media, no matter how much people wanted her gone. Number 8. She reflected society's reality. Rita Skeeter's articles revealed more than just her own ambition. They showed what the wizarding public wanted to read. People claimed to despise her, but they still bought every copy of the Daily Prophet with her name on it. They craved scandal, whispered rumors, and dramatic headlines. In truth, Rita was a mirror, reflecting society's appetite for gossip back at itself. Without her, the magical world might have seemed too noble, too polished, almost unreal. One of the clearest examples came during the Triwizard Tournament. Instead of sober analysis, readers devoured stories about Harry's supposed tragic heartaches and Hermione's dangerous manipulations. In Goblet of Fire, Rita wrote, "Harry Potter's secret heartache. The boy wizard cries himself to sleep over his doomed love for Hermione Granger." The words were absurd, yet people discussed them. They weren't angry at Rita alone. They were entertained by the fantasy she created. It revealed what her audience truly valued. Even adults in power weren't immune. Cornelius Fudge and ministry officials used Rita's pen when it suited them. They understood that public opinion followed headlines, not court records. Society didn't want truth, it wanted spectacle. And Rita delivered. Every exaggerated word she wrote became proof that the wizarding community preferred sensation over dull honesty. Her popularity wasn't just about her talent, it was about the hunger of her readers. Through her, the cracks in that world became visible. Wizards and witches who prided themselves on wisdom turned out to be no better than muggles reading tabloids. They laughed, they gossiped, they passed judgment on people they barely knew. Rita Skeeter wasn't simply a villain, she was a symptom. And without her, the wizarding world might never have revealed its own weakness for drama and scandal. Number 9, she inspired other journalists. Rita Skeeter's articles left a mark that younger writers couldn't ignore. Her methods were flashy, sometimes dishonest, but they worked. Readers bought the Daily Prophet when her name appeared on the front page. Aspiring journalists watched and understood one thing: attention mattered more than facts. Even if they despised her, they studied her success. That kind of influence is rare, and it showed how powerful her voice was in the wizarding press. Her influence stretched beyond Hogwarts. In Order of the Phoenix, when the Ministry tried to silence Harry's story about Voldemort, few journalists dared to speak out. Yet the very reason Hermione later sought Rita's help was because she knew Rita could reach people. As Hermione said bitterly, "We need someone who can write, and people do read Rita Skeeter." That line revealed her impact. Other writers might have been more honest, but none could command attention like Rita. Even the backlash against her became a form of inspiration. Some journalists wanted to prove they were nothing like her, focusing on integrity instead of scandal. Others secretly borrowed her tricks: sensational headlines, sharp questions, emotional hooks, while pretending to be more respectable. Rita shaped the field by forcing everyone else to define themselves in comparison to her. In a way, she set the standard, even if it was a controversial one. Her legacy was messy but undeniable. Young reporters whispered her name, whether they admired her or despised her. They knew that one woman with a quick quotes quill and a dangerous imagination had changed how wizarding news was written. She showed that journalism could be a weapon, and once she proved that, no one could go back to the quiet, boring days of neutral reporting. Number 10, she added humor to the story. Rita Skeeter could make even the darkest situations feel absurd. Her articles, full of exaggerations and twisted truths, often carried a tone so overblown it bordered on comedy. When she described Harry as a tragic young hero with a taste for danger, readers laughed as much as they frowned. Her quill didn't just sting, it also entertained. She was the kind of character who could make you roll your eyes and smirk at the same time. One of the clearest examples came during the Yule Ball. While most saw it as a school celebration, Rita made it sound like the wizarding version of a royal scandal. She claimed Victor Crumb was smitten with bushy-haired Hermione Granger and hinted at heartbreak for Harry. For those reading her words, the drama was ridiculous, almost like parody. The humor wasn't in the truth, but in how far from reality her stories wandered. Even her victims, though frustrated, couldn't deny how ludicrous her imagination could be. Her way of speaking added to the effect. Rita didn't just interview, she performed. In Goblet of Fire, she leaned close to Harry and cooed, "You don't mind, Harry, if I use a quick quotes quill?" As if it were the most natural thing in the world. The quill immediately began scribbling nonsense about Harry's tragic loneliness. The absurdity of the scene made readers laugh, even as Harry squirmed. Rita turned interviews into comedies of discomfort. That was her secret contribution to the story. She was a villain, yes, but a comical one, and her presence softened the weight of darker chapters. In a tale filled with death, betrayal, and the rise of Voldemort, Rita Skeeter's antics felt almost like comic relief. Like a pinch of spice, she stung on the tongue, but without her, the feast of the story might have felt too heavy to swallow. Number 11, she knew how to create drama. Rita Skeeter had a gift for turning the ordinary into spectacle. She could take a routine meeting at the ministry and frame it like a duel between giants. Boring numbers about cauldron thickness suddenly became tales of corruption and scandal. Readers didn't care about the truth, they cared about the performance. Rita gave them that performance, every line sharpened to draw gasps and whispers. Her flair for drama was clearest during the Tri-Wizard tournament. When Harry's name came out of the Goblet of Fire, Rita didn't simply report the fact. She painted him as a reckless boy craving attention. In her article, she declared, "Harry Potter, the boy who has faced he who must not be named, is now no stranger to danger. But is he craving more?" That question alone turned a confusing accident into a scandal that set the wizarding world buzzing. She took a moment of shock and stretched it into a stage play. Hermione also became one of Rita's favorite dramatic tools. Instead of writing that she was studying hard, Rita portrayed her as a heartbreaker. She wrote of Hermione breaking Harry Potter's heart while flirting with Victor Crumb. Readers didn't see the library or the long hours of hard work. They saw a romantic triangle filled with betrayal. That was Rita's talent, filtering reality through exaggeration until people saw what they wanted, not what was there. Drama was her weapon, and it made her articles unforgettable. Even those who hated her work couldn't ignore it. People argued about her stories in the leaky cauldron and gossiped about her claims in the corridors of Hogwarts. Without Rita, the wizarding newspapers might have been nothing more than dull reports. With her, they became part of the story itself. Proof that words, when sharpened, could be as thrilling as any spell. Number 12, she understood human psychology. Rita Skeeter's greatest weapon was not her quill but her instinct for human weakness. She could look at a person, catch a flicker in their eyes, and know exactly which words would cut deepest. That talent is what made her articles so dangerous. She understood that truth mattered less than impact, and that emotions, fear, anger, jealousy, were the real currency of storytelling. Few could resist her ability to stir them. Take her treatment of Hermione Granger during the Triwizard Tournament. Rita didn't invent outright lies at first. She twisted perceptions. She saw the admiration Victor Crumb had for Hermione, and she knew how to exploit it. In the Daily Prophet she wrote, "Harry Potter's secret heartache, a girl torn between a famous Quidditch star and the boy who lived." That single line painted Hermione as manipulative, Harry as desperate, and Crumb as a rival. The truth was irrelevant. What mattered was that readers gossiped, whispered, and judged. Her mastery lay in presenting half-truths with the confidence of fact. Rita sensed how much the public loved drama, and she gave it to them wrapped in sharp sentences. When she interviewed Harry, she leaned forward, eyes glinting, and asked questions designed to unsettle. "So, Harry, how does it feel to be 14 and already facing the possibility of death?" It wasn't about facts. It was about pulling something raw from him and then spinning it into spectacle. This is what made Rita more than just a journalist. She was a manipulator of emotions, a puppeteer pulling invisible strings. People hated her, yet they read her work. They felt outrage, pity, even joy at the downfall of others, all because she knew which button to push. It was a talent as dark as it was dazzling, and it left her mark on everyone she touched. Number 13, she wasn't afraid of powerful figures. Rita Skeeter's reputation in the wizarding world was shaped by her acid green quill, her talent for sensationalism, and her tendency to embellish until fact blurred into fiction. Yet beyond her faults, one cannot deny her boldness in facing figures most journalists avoided. In a society where the Ministry of Magic often dictated the rhythm of public opinion, she dared to write names others whispered only in private. Ministers, auras, famous witches, and even Albus Dumbledore himself, none were beyond her reach. This audacity, though wrapped in scandal, suggests that Harry Potter was not entirely wrong to force readers to consider Skeeter in a softer light. Her writing exposed the arrogance of the powerful, even if the truths were twisted in her ink. Take Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, for much of Harry's time at Hogwarts. Most wizarding reporters treated him with deference, portraying him as a stable leader in times of uncertainty. Yet Skeeter's articles cut into his carefully curated image, highlighting paranoia and insecurity. When she wrote about the Triwizard Tournament, she suggested that Fudge had been weak in managing international relations, pointing out his constant attempts to control appearances. The Daily Prophet had long been the ministry's mouthpiece, but Skeeter found ways to bend its pages toward gossip and criticism. Her style was messy, but the fact that she pressed her pen against the minister's skin revealed a courage most lacked. Her willingness to turn her quill against Albus Dumbledore stands as another striking example. For decades, Dumbledore was treated with near reverence by journalists, admired as the greatest wizard of his age. Yet Skeeter wrote in The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore that he was not so saintly as he made out, a line that shook public perception. She dared to probe into his childhood, his friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, and his family tragedies. Yes, she twisted events into a darker shape, but the bravery of even touching such subjects is worth acknowledgement. Most reporters would never risk alienating the wizard who defeated Grindelwald and was headmaster of Hogwarts, but Skeeter pushed forward with the claim that the world needed to see Dumbledore stripped of myth. Harry Potter himself understood the double edge of Skeeter's pen better than anyone. He despised her intrusions, her fabrications, her malicious suggestions. But he also came to realize, especially during the events of Order of the Phoenix, that her voice could be redirected against the real dangers. When the Ministry and the Prophet refused to print Harry's account of Voldemort's return, it was Skeeter who eventually carried his truth into the pages of the Quibbler. She may have done it under duress, but her words still became the spark that reached witches and wizards beyond the Ministry's grip. "It's true he's back," Harry declared in that piece, and Skeeter's quill carried it farther than any official announcement dared. Without her, the truth might have remained buried under Fudge's propaganda. Skeeter's boldness in covering the Triwizard Tournament offers another vivid example. She stalked champions, mothers, and teachers, writing lurid descriptions that angered many. Yet it is crucial to see that she never hesitated to touch the names of those at the very top. She accused Hermione Granger of manipulating Harry and Victor Crumb, sneaked into private moments between Harry and his friends, and painted portraits of Dumbledore's leadership that none of the Prophet's safer journalists would have risked. While her methods were predatory, she highlighted a gap in magical journalism. No one else dared pry so close to those commanding the headlines. Her articles, dripping with venom, still demonstrated that even the most revered figures could not silence her quill. Consider her treatment of Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Bagman was a beloved figure, remembered as a Quidditch star, yet Skeeter hinted at his shady past and reckless choices during the tournament. She reminded readers that Bagman had once stood trial for dealing with Death Eaters, a fact many wanted to forget. Her approach was unkind, but by forcing these issues into the public eye, she ensured that power could not always hide behind charm and nostalgia. Bagman himself seemed shocked at how quickly she could strip away his heroic image. Skeeter's pen left scratches on reputations most wizards thought untouchable. The wizarding press had long been accused of cowardice. The Daily Prophet, especially under Fudge, became an instrument of denial, portraying Voldemort's return as Harry's hysteria. Journalists aligned with the Ministry for safety, avoiding subjects that might lead to confrontation. Skeeter alone thrived on confrontation, though for selfish motives. Still, her very recklessness served as an antidote to uniformity. She proved that powerful figures were not beyond criticism, even if her criticisms carried more scandal than substance. In a society prone to hiding its shadows, Skeeter shone a harsh, intrusive light, whether people wanted it or not. Her exploration of Dumbledore's relationship with Grindelwald exemplifies the same pattern. Dumbledore's greatest ambition, she wrote, was to create a new order with Grindelwald, a vision of wizard dominance. Though she exaggerated, she forced readers to confront uncomfortable truths. The public preferred to imagine Dumbledore as flawless, but Skeeter peeled back that comfort. In doing so, she reminded the wizarding world that even its heroes had weaknesses, mistakes, and questionable choices. Her revelations were sensational, but they echoed a deeper truth. Absolute trust in the powerful is dangerous, and every figure of influence should face scrutiny. Number 14, she kept even her enemies on edge. Rita Skeeter was not the kind of person Harry Potter or Hermione Granger wanted near their lives, yet her shadow lingered in the background of their most defining moments. She did not duel, nor did she belong to Voldemort's army, but her quill was sharp enough to wound pride, to twist reputations, and to force her targets into constant vigilance. It is precisely this uncomfortable quality that makes her a figure worth reconsidering. By being a constant menace, Rita became the unintentional teacher of caution. She held even her enemies in suspense, and this tension shaped the way Harry and his friends guarded themselves, turned their secrets into fortresses, and learned to anticipate manipulation. The Triwizard Tournament was the clearest stage for Rita's peculiar influence. When Harry was unwillingly entered into the dangerous competition, he found himself surrounded not only by dragons and deathly tasks, but by Rita's relentless pen. She published that infamous article in the Daily Prophet, describing him as a tragic boy who cries in his sleep. For Harry, it was humiliating. For Hermione, it was outrageous. Yet the effect was immediate. Harry began to notice how the smallest careless word could be distorted into a headline. This was not simply embarrassment, it was training. Rita made him realize that every action was watched and that secrecy was no longer optional. Hermione Granger's battle with Rita was even sharper. Hermione despised her methods and called her a horrible woman, but there was a strange irony in how much Rita forced Hermione to grow. When Skeeter published rumors about Hermione being romantically linked to both Harry and Victor Crumb, the insult was obvious. Still behind the cruelty lay a lesson Hermione could not ignore. She learned that appearances mattered, that gossip shaped public perception faster than truth could repair it, and that words had power equal to wands. Later, this understanding became crucial when Hermione and her friends had to keep their movements hidden from the Ministry and Voldemort's followers. They knew exactly how fragile reputations were, because Skeeter had shown them. Fascinating truth about Rita is that she thrived by exposing weaknesses, whether real or fabricated. For Harry and his circle, this was deeply uncomfortable. Yet in hindsight, such pressure prepared them for enemies who were far more dangerous. Voldemort's greatest weapon was fear and suspicion. Skeeter's weapon was sensationalism. They were not the same, but both demanded the same defense: silence, secrecy, and self-control. In a strange twist of fate, the very skills the trio developed against Rita's poison were the ones that later protected them when secrecy became a matter of survival. It is worth remembering that Skeeter was not merely cruel for cruelty's sake. She sought stories that people would read. Her animagus form, the small beetle she used to sneak into private conversations, was her way of staying one step ahead. Hermione's discovery of this secret turned the tables. Yet even that moment, when Hermione caught Skeeter in a jar, proved Rita's importance. If Rita had not been meddling so dangerously, Hermione would never have sharpened her investigative instincts. Rita forced her to think like a strategist, to look for hidden patterns, to imagine what secrets others could exploit. Harry himself often hated Skeeter, but there is a strange acknowledgement in how often her words influenced the wizarding world's perception of him. In Goblet of Fire, her pieces painted him as unstable, jealous, and even manipulative. Harry knew the truth, but the public did not. "I suppose I'm a tragic figure, am I?" he muttered after reading one of her articles. That bitterness was more than irritation. It was his first taste of what it meant to be famous beyond control. Later, as the Chosen One, he would live under similar distortions, except magnified by Voldemort's propaganda. Skeeter was his rehearsal for that darker theatre. Even Dumbledore seemed to understand Rita's paradoxical role. He never wasted much time refuting her directly. Instead, he let her write, knowing that the truth could not be buried forever. But for Harry, Hermione, and Ron, it was different. They had to react to her presence constantly, to measure their words carefully. That discipline became second nature. Without Rita's intrusive lens, they might not have realized how even harmless details could spiral into dangerous consequences. When the Order of the Phoenix tried to spread the truth about Voldemort's return, it was not the Death Eaters who controlled the story, but the Ministry, aided by media voices like Rita's. At that point, her pen was silent under Ministry pressure, but her earlier influence still echoed. Harry's anger at being portrayed as delusional in The Prophet was born from his experience with Skeeter's manipulations. He had already learned that truth alone was powerless without narrative. Later, Hermione cleverly turned that lesson into action by using Rita herself to publish Harry's account in the Quibbler. The irony could not be stronger. The enemy became the tool, and Rita's talent for creating spectacle was redirected for good. That moment in Order of the Phoenix shows most clearly why Skeeter's presence mattered. Hermione blackmailed her into writing the piece, but the outcome was more than blackmail. It was strategy. The trio had absorbed Skeeter's understanding of audiences and learned that sometimes a message had to be wrapped in scandal to reach people. It was Rita's style, not her morality, that spread the truth. And once again, even when despised, she held the power to move crowds. One cannot ignore how much fear Skeeter inspired in those who crossed her. Fleur Delacour, Victor Crumb, and even Cedric Diggory found themselves twisted into caricatures by her writing. This was unpleasant, but it taught them that heroes and villains could be rewritten overnight. Harry watched this happen and realized that being seen as noble or weak was rarely in his control. That realization made him less naive, less willing to expect fairness from the public, and more determined to build his own path. Number 15, she became part of cultural legacy. Rita Skeeter occupies a strange position in the Harry Potter universe, a place halfway between disdain and reluctant admiration. Her presence in the fourth book, The Goblet of Fire, is marked by lies, manipulations, and exaggerations, yet it is impossible to deny how unforgettable she is. From her quick quotes, Quill scribbling venom on parchment, to her intrusive animagus transformations, Rita embodies the dangers and allure of journalism twisted by ambition. And yet years after the saga was completed, her shadow lingers in the minds of readers. One may despise her ethics, but one cannot deny her contribution to the magical world's cultural memory. Like a villain who becomes iconic precisely because of their flaws, Skeeter holds a permanent seat at the table of unforgettable characters. When we recall her role in The Goblet of Fire, it is impossible not to laugh at her grotesque distortions of the truth. Harry's scar, burning with pain, becomes, in her pen, a sign of a tragic orphan tortured by nightmares. Hermione Granger, a loyal friend, is slandered as Harry Potter's heartbreaker, allegedly toying with both Harry and Victor Crumb. In Chapter 18, Rowling writes, "A quill skidded across the parchment, recording the conversation in a garish purple ink." The book soon described Harry as a boy who cried out in his sleep, tormented by his fame. The irony is that Harry is indeed plagued by nightmares, but Skeeter twists them into cheap melodrama. This exaggeration is what makes her unforgettable. The absurdity of her fabrications brings both frustration and humor, and readers remember the emotional sting that her articles left on characters. There is also an undeniable artistry in her methods, even if they are ethically corrupt. Skeeter is an unregistered animagus, transforming into a beetle to crawl into private spaces, a fact Hermione eventually uncovers in The Goblet of Fire. Rowling describes this ability with a sharp detail. Rita wasn't a beetle at all, she was an unregistered animagus. This twist not only gave Skeeter a clever edge, but also elevated her beyond the ordinary gossip columnist. Her persistence and inventiveness reveal how far she is willing to go for a story. In doing so, Skeeter symbolizes the power of media to invade, manipulate, and shape reality, a theme that resonates strongly in today's culture of sensational headlines and half-truths. It is worth remembering how much emotional turmoil she created for Harry himself. In The Goblet of Fire, Harry is already struggling with being a Triwizard champion against his will, facing life-threatening tasks. Yet Skeeter adds fuel to the fire, painting him as unstable and attention-seeking. The Daily Prophet headlines scream, "Harry Potter's secret heartache." For a boy already navigating trauma, this misrepresentation is cruel. And still, within the narrative, her cruelty underscores how Harry's challenges are not just about dark magic, but about public perception. Skeeter forces the reader to consider the heavy price of fame in the wizarding world, making her essential to the larger themes of the saga. Hermione's clash with Skeeter offers another memorable dimension to her character. Skeeter's articles about Hermione being romantically entangled with both Harry and Victor Crumb deeply wound her, exposing the brutal consequences of unchecked journalism. Hermione, however, does not cower. Instead, she fights back. Her discovery of Skeeter's animagus secret allows her to blackmail the journalist into silence throughout the fifth book. This act of resistance highlights Hermione's wit and courage, turning the tables on an adult who represents institutional power. It also demonstrates that Skeeter is more than comic relief. She is a foil that allows Hermione's bravery to shine. In the Order of the Phoenix, Skeeter reappears in an unexpected capacity, this time somewhat tamed by Hermione's control. When Harry decides to share his version of Voldemort's return with the wizarding public, it is Skeeter who writes the article for the Quibbler. Rowling notes, Skeeter's quill twitched as she reluctantly wrote Harry's words. Hermione's sharp gaze never left her. The irony is delicious. The same woman who once thrived on exaggeration now becomes the vessel for truth constrained by Hermione's authority. In this moment, Skeeter is both comic and tragic, a woman of talent shackled by her own lack of integrity. And yet she is the only journalist capable of amplifying Harry's message. Without her, the truth might never have reached the wizarding public. It is one of the paradoxes that make Skeeter so memorable. Beyond the narrative, Rita Skeeter's legacy extends into the cultural atmosphere of the Harry Potter world itself. Her name has become shorthand for gossip journalism, both in fan discussions and in wider literary analysis. To describe a reckless reporter in real life as a Rita Skeeter instantly conveys the image of a person willing to twist truth for sensation. Few fictional journalists have achieved such recognition. This level of symbolic power confirms her place not just in the story, but in the broader mythology surrounding it. Her presence lingers like a cultural echo, proof that even minor characters can achieve immortality. The brilliance of her construction lies in how Rowling uses her as satire. Skeeter mirrors real-world journalism scandals where truth is sacrificed for spectacle. Her quick quotes, quill, which automatically writes falsehoods even as she interviews, becomes a metaphor for media that invents drama before facts. Readers laugh at the absurdity, but they also recognize the warning. The Harry Potter series is often praised for its exploration of power, prejudice, and loyalty, yet Skeeter reminds us of another theme, the manipulation of information. In this way, she becomes not just a nuisance, but a cultural critique, one that resonates far beyond the walls of Hogwarts. Number 16, she knew how to use connections. Rita Skeeter has often been portrayed as a villain in the Harry Potter saga, the unscrupulous journalist who twisted words, manipulated quotes, and turned half-truths into headlines that sold copies of the Daily Prophet. Yet hidden behind the caricature of a scandal-hungry reporter lies a trait that cannot be dismissed lightly, her remarkable network of connections and her ability to wield it like a weapon. For a world built on secrets, alliances, and information, Rita's talent for knowing the right person at the right time granted her a position of power many overlooked. Her methods were questionable, but her mastery of connections made her influential in a society where influence mattered as much as wand work. In the pages of The Goblet of Fire, when Harry finds himself suddenly the center of scandal after being chosen as an unexpected Triwizard champion, Rita appears almost instantly, quill poised, ready to capture the narrative. While others were still stunned by the turn of events, she was already publishing a feature that not only placed Harry under the magnifying glass of public opinion, but also shaped how the entire wizarding community perceived him. This was not luck. This was the result of having editors ready to print her stories without hesitation, ministry insiders eager to provide whispers of rumor, and readers conditioned to believe her words. Skeeter's true gift lay not only in what she wrote, but in how fast she could gather the threads of information and tie them into a narrative before anyone else. One cannot ignore how deeply she embedded herself into the Ministry of Magic's web of bureaucracy. Cornelius Fudge, as minister, enjoyed cultivating his own favorable press, and Rita was often positioned to provide it. Her glowing accounts of the ministry's handling of crises were not born out of admiration, but of mutual benefit. She gave them good press when they needed it, and in return, officials looked the other way when her stories became more invasive than ethical boundaries allowed. This kind of symbiosis only happens when a journalist has cultivated connections so deeply that even those who dislike her find it easier to tolerate her than to exclude her. It made her feared, but it also made her indispensable. Rita also knew how to navigate the world of everyday witches and wizards. She was not confined to offices and parlors of power. She mingled with shopkeepers in Diagon Alley, students at Hogwarts, and eccentric characters that others ignored. In Goblet of Fire, she somehow managed to gather details about Hagrid's parentage, details so obscure that they reveal she had sources even among the less glamorous circles of wizarding life. The truth, at last, about Rubeus Hagrid's dangerous secret, her article proclaimed, turning the gentle half-giant into a figure of fear. The ability to retrieve such information suggests that she knew precisely who to talk to in order to uncover secrets hidden in plain sight. It is one thing to rely on public records, but quite another to hear whispers in taverns and connect them into a story before anyone else recognizes their significance. The quick quotes, "Quill may have exaggerated, but it was useless without material to embellish." Rita's connections provided the bones, and the quill merely added flesh to the skeleton. When she claimed that Harry was a boy with a tragic past crying out for love, she was not inventing from nothing. She had gathered enough from brief interactions, from those willing to gossip about Harry's upbringing, and from her knowledge of what sold in print. It shows a sharp understanding of people as much as events. Connections do not simply mean names in a book, they mean an instinct for how to extract information. Others would not even think to share. Rita was skilled in that respect, and Harry, though furious, became another victim of her vast and invisible web. Her network was not limited to Britain alone. During the Triwizard Tournament, Rita produced sensational coverage that reached not only local readers, but those abroad who followed the event. Durmstrang's secrets, Beauxbaton's mysteries, and the private lives of foreign champions somehow became accessible to her quill. Victor Crumb, famously reticent and private, found his personal life sprawled across the Daily Prophet's columns. Such access cannot be explained by simple luck. She must have cultivated informants who could provide her with tidbits others were incapable of extracting. That ability to infiltrate not just local, but international circles speaks volumes about her reach. In a world divided by schools and borders, Rita Skeeter was a rare figure who could bridge the gaps. What makes this talent all the more striking is the way she weaponized it in a society that mistrusted her. Rita was not loved, but she was read. She was not admired, but she was unavoidable. Her colleagues may have sneered at her methods, yet when her name appeared beneath a headline, the community paid attention. This paradox, disliked but indispensable, was the essence of her power. A web of connections, when strong enough, does not need affection to survive. It thrives on relevance, and Rita was always relevant. "The Prophet exists to sell itself, you silly boy," she once declared, and those words underline her confidence in her own indispensability. The fact that Hermione Granger had to resort to blackmail to silence her in the Order of the Phoenix shows the extent of Rita's threat. Few individuals could rattle Hermione's iron sense of morality, yet Skeeter's ability to spread damaging narratives about Harry during a time when the Ministry denied Voldemort's return forced Hermione's hand. Rita's web of contacts, combined with her animagus secret, gave her an edge that even the truth could not easily undo. For all her unpopularity, she could not simply be ignored or out-argued. Information was her weapon, and her sources were her ammunition. Without cutting off the supply, she remained dangerous. Rita's article about Dumbledore in the Deathly Hallows further proves this. In The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, she painted a portrait of the headmaster that shocked readers who had once revered him. The very fact that she could piece together fragments of Dumbledore's past, interviewing figures like Bathilda Bagshot, and unearthing details from the obscure village of Godric's Hollow, shows her relentless pursuit of connections in unexpected places. She spoke to those who would not normally find themselves in the public eye and turned their words into revelations. It is easy to dismiss the book as slander, but the amount of information she gathered demonstrates her mastery of networks once more. Without her persistence, many of those details might have remained buried forever. The wizarding world is often portrayed as secretive, with truths buried beneath centuries of silence, but Rita Skeeter thrived in this environment. Where others respected boundaries, she trespassed. Where others feared rejection, she persisted. Her connections were not simply acquaintances, but carefully woven threads in a net designed to catch secrets. The Ministry of Magic, Hogwarts, obscure villages, foreign champions, grieving families, all became part of her map of influence. To operate at that level requires a skill most characters lacked. Even Dumbledore, though wise, could not control how she used her network, which speaks volumes about her tenacity. Harry himself was both victim and beneficiary of Rita's reach. Though he despised her for her invasive stories, her presence ensured that his narrative was never forgotten. In a way, Rita forced the wizarding world to look at Harry even when it would have been easier to dismiss him. The Tri-Wizard tournament, the whispers about his scar, the accusations of lying about Voldemort's return, all gained traction because Skeeter amplified them. Ironically, this same amplification kept Harry at the center of wizarding politics. For better or worse, Rita's network ensured his story was impossible to ignore. He may not have wanted her attention, but it made him relevant at moments when irrelevance could have been dangerous. It is worth remembering that Skeeter did not possess great magical power. She was not a skilled duelist, nor a famous witch in her own right. Her animagus ability was rare, but it was not enough on its own to guarantee influence. What made her powerful was her mastery of people, her instinct for who knew what, and her ability to turn fragile whispers into enduring narratives. In that sense, she embodies a lesson that resonates beyond her character. Connections, when cultivated deliberately, can outmatch even spells in shaping a world. Rita proved that influence was not about being liked, but about being indispensable to the flow of information. Thus, when readers revisit her role in the series, it becomes possible to soften the judgment just slightly. Her ethics were questionable, her methods ruthless, but her skill undeniable. In a world where information was currency, Rita Skeeter was wealthy. She demonstrated how far one could go not with charm or kindness, but with connections sharpened into tools. Even those who loathed her could not escape the fact that she mattered. And in the end, that is perhaps the most compelling reason to treat her with a hint of warmth. She mastered a skill everyone secretly admires, the ability to make herself influential in a world that would rather have rejected her entirely. Number 17. She had rare charisma. Rita Skeeter was never the most beloved figure in the Harry Potter universe, yet there was something about her that refused to fade into the background. She was a woman who wore bright lime green robes with deliberate exaggeration, paraded her golden quill like a weapon, and smiled with the sort of satisfaction that made others clench their fists. And yet, hidden beneath this layer of excess, Rita possessed a rare quality that cannot be dismissed so easily: charisma. Her ability to dominate a room, twist a conversation to her liking, and make people hang on her words gave her a power far beyond what most journalists could hope to wield. In a society filled with intimidating figures such as Albus Dumbledore, Cornelius Fudge, and Lord Voldemort himself, Rita Skeeter's survival was not a matter of luck, but of this very charisma. One striking moment that illustrates her unique hold on people can be found in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. When Harry is unwillingly cornered for an interview during the Tri-Wizard tournament, Rita manages to create an atmosphere in which even his protests are drowned beneath her relentless charm. She pulls him into a broom cupboard, her quick quotes, "Quill already at the ready," and suddenly Harry finds himself the unwilling centerpiece of a narrative he cannot control. The way she manipulates his words, the way she inserts tears shining in his eyes when none existed, shows how powerful her charisma truly was. It wasn't truth she sold, it was attention. And in that moment, Harry became a subject in her orbit, unable to escape until she released him. It is easy to dismiss such behavior as manipulative or dishonest, but there is also a curious admiration one can feel for someone so effective in commanding attention. Consider the number of students, professors, and ministry officials who could not resist commenting on her articles, even if only to complain. She had the rare ability to make her writing impossible to ignore. Dumbledore himself, usually unflappable, admitted at the end of Goblet of Fire that Rita enjoys making mischief and hinted that silencing her might be wiser than confronting her head-on. For a woman without magical power beyond her animagus ability, to unsettle the most powerful wizard of the age speaks to her innate magnetism. There is also a theatricality to her that deserves recognition. Rita did not simply report news, she performed it. Every appearance she made, whether sweeping into the Hogwarts grounds in her jewel-coloured robes or scribbling her quill furiously in plain sight, became a spectacle. She knew how to make people look at her, how to turn herself into the very centre of the story. In a world where so many witches and wizards blended into anonymity, Rita carved out a permanent place in memory. Her charisma was not just about controlling words, it was about orchestrating presence. She was her own advertisement. Some might argue that Rita's tactics were cruel, and certainly there is truth in that. Hermione Granger despised her with a burning intensity, calling her a horrible woman, and later trapping her in a jar as a beetle to prevent further damage. Yet even in Hermione's loathing, there is a recognition of Rita's skill. Hermione knew Rita could cause real harm precisely because people listened to her, because she had a way of making lies feel like possibilities. A less charismatic journalist would have been brushed aside as a nuisance. Rita, however, forced the heroes of the story to reckon with her influence. Her charisma was most visible when she engaged with figures of power. Cornelius Fudge, despite being Minister for Magic, rarely contradicted her in public. When Rita wrote her scathing piece about Hagrid's half-giant parentage, the ministry did not leap to his defense. Instead, whispers grew louder, parents complained, and Hagrid retreated from his teaching duties. This is the impact of Rita's presence. Her words carried weight, not because they were true, but because they carried the force of her personality. The ripple effect of her charisma spread through the entire wizarding community. Perhaps most telling of all was the way she infiltrated private spaces. Very few could manage to breach the defenses of Hogwarts itself to mine its secrets, yet Rita did it with flair. Whether slipping in as a beetle to overhear conversations or strolling boldly through the castle with her quill, she demonstrated a fearlessness that was bolstered by her confidence. She believed people would pay attention to her no matter what she did, and they did. This belief, projected outward, created a reality where even her enemies could not ignore her. Even Harry himself, who detested the false image she painted of him, could not help but recognize the reach of her articles. In Order of the Phoenix, when the Ministry and Daily Prophet refused to acknowledge Voldemort's return, it was Harry's desperate need for someone like Rita that brought her back into relevance. Hermione convinced her to write Harry's version of events for the Quibbler, and Rita, ever the opportunist, did so with the same charisma that had once wounded him. The results were undeniable. Wizards and witches across Britain began to whisper that perhaps Harry's story held truth. Ironically, the very charisma that had once been used against him became the tool that spread his voice when no one else would listen. This contradiction lies at the heart of why Rita Skeeter deserves a touch of warmth, even if not affection. She was not an easy ally, nor was she a trustworthy one, yet her charisma made her adaptable, a quality that proved invaluable when the tides shifted. Unlike rigid figures such as Dolores Umbridge, whose cruelty lacked any charm, Rita retained a spark that kept doors open. She could pivot from character assassination to reluctant truth-telling, and both felt authentic because her magnetism was never in question. People could hate her, but they could not dismiss her. The charisma of Rita Skeeter also stemmed from her language. The very words she chose were crafted to seduce. Consider how her quick quotes quill produced phrases dripping with emotion, regardless of accuracy. Harry Potter's eyes filled with tears as he spoke of his late parents. While Harry himself sat in disbelief, readers outside the page could feel something stir. This manipulation of language is itself a charisma-driven act. It is not merely lying, it is making lies desirable to believe. Her writing carried the same flair she embodied in person, bold, colourful, irresistible. Even her enemies, when pressed, displayed a grudging fascination. Hermione might have scowled at her every sentence, but she was clever enough to harness Rita's skill when no one else would print Harry's truth. Dumbledore, too, never wasted his breath on condemning her outright. Instead, he treated her like a force of nature, irritating, destructive at times, but undeniably powerful. Charisma creates that paradox, the ability to be loathed and needed in equal measure. Rita Skeeter embodied it fully. There is a further irony in how Rita's charisma echoed that of Voldemort. Both relied on commanding presence, persuasive manipulation, and the ability to control narratives. The difference was in degree and intent. Voldemort wielded fear and power, Rita wielded gossip and performance. Yet the similarity cannot be ignored. Both understood that perception is often more important than truth. In this way, Rita can be seen not as a mere side character, but as a reflection of the broader theme of power in the series. Charisma, whether dark or flamboyant, shapes destinies. Looking back, one might ask whether Rita Skeeter ever truly changed. She remained, until the very end, a woman who sought her own gain first. But her charisma, even when tainted with manipulation, offered a kind of vibrancy to the wizarding world. She lit up pages of the Daily Prophet with scandal. She made even dull moments feel like a theatre performance. And she proved that survival in a dangerous world sometimes required more than just skill. It required presence. This presence is why she continues to fascinate readers long after the last book closed. In the end, Rita Skeeter forces us to consider that charisma is not always aligned with virtue. It can be wielded to mislead, to harm, to ridicule, but it can also be repurposed, as Hermione demonstrated, to amplify truths when all else fails. Harry Potter's story, in part, owed its spread to the very woman who once twisted his words into fantasy. And perhaps this contradiction is the true essence of Rita's charm. She was both a danger and a resource, both despised and, oddly, indispensable. Charisma like hers is rare, and for that reason, she deserves at least a warmer glance, if not admiration. Number 18, she was braver than she seemed. Rita Skeeter's reputation in the wizarding world has always been soaked in scandal, exaggeration, and a tendency to twist words until they no longer resembled the truth. Yet, hidden beneath her acid green quill and pages of the Daily Prophet lurks a quality that few acknowledge: courage. To understand her, one must remember that she deliberately put herself in places where even the most battle-hardened auras preferred caution. Rita did not simply wait for gossip to come to her, she hunted it, often at great personal risk. The fact that she transformed into a beetle, sneaking into highly dangerous and unpredictable environments, reveals a daring streak that deserves a closer look. She may not have fought Death Eaters with a wand raised in defiance, but she tested her life in ways that required boldness of a different kind. One of the most striking examples lies in her infiltration of the Triwizard Tournament. Consider the atmosphere of that event, the air buzzing with the expectation of danger, the knowledge that dragons, mermaids, and deadly labyrinths awaited the champions. Rita, craving a story that no one else could tell, took the extraordinary step of shrinking herself into a tiny, fragile beetle and hiding within the very scenes where chaos unfolded. She observed Harry Potter face the Hungarian horntail, a creature so lethal that seasoned wizards struggled to control it. Hagrid described dragons as beasts no sane wizard would approach. and yet Rita deliberately placed herself within breathing distance of one by transforming into a form that could be crushed in an instant. This was not mere ambition, it was recklessness paired with bravery, the kind that often blurs into each other. When she later turned her attention to the Ministry of Magic, her boldness took on an even sharper edge. The Ministry corridors were not friendly to intruders, especially when Fudge's administration grew paranoid about Dumbledore's growing influence and Harry's testimony about Voldemort's return. And yet Rita managed to infiltrate meetings, overhear whispered conversations, and slip past enchanted barriers without being detected. We may dislike her motives, but the feat itself requires admiration. Few witches would risk the possibility of discovery and imprisonment under charges of illegal animagus transformation. As Hermione Granger discovered, Rita never registered her abilities and, in the wizarding world, such a crime carried weighty punishment. Rita knew this, and still she pressed forward, quill in hand, wings buzzing. It is worth pausing to consider Hermione's description in Goblet of Fire. You're an unregistered animagus. You get into places you shouldn't be. You write lies. Hermione's fury is justified, yet within the accusation is an unintentional acknowledgement of Skeeter's nerve. To become an animagus requires immense magical talent and even more discipline, a skill beyond most Hogwarts graduates. That she kept it secret reveals her cunning, but the very act of wielding it so freely in dangerous spaces demonstrates her willingness to take personal risks to feed her insatiable hunger for exclusive stories. Perhaps we should compare her with those who hesitated. Percy Weasley, for instance, spent much of his career clinging to bureaucracy, too afraid to act outside the rules. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, shrank from the truth of Voldemort's return because he feared political instability. In contrast, Rita Skeeter willingly entered arenas of danger not for the sake of noble causes but for her career. Yet the essence of courage is not always tied to morality. Bravery can serve selfish purposes as much as selfless ones. Rita reminds us that fearlessness and questionable ethics can coexist, a combination both infuriating and strangely admirable. The Triwizard Tournament again offers a vivid moment. Imagine the second task when Harry dove into the icy waters of the Black Lake to rescue Ron. Beneath the surface swam merpeople armed with spears, Grindylows lurking in shadows, and an enchanted environment designed to overwhelm even the strongest champion. Where was Rita? Hidden somewhere close, eyes glittering, wings humming, recording in her mind details no other journalist dared to witness firsthand. The thought of being trapped underwater in beetle form, crushed by magical pressure, or attacked by the creatures patrolling the depths, did not dissuade her. She returned alive and triumphant, with notes sharp enough to sting her readers and her enemies alike. Her reporting may have been cruel, but it demanded an iron will. Consider her article, Harry Potter's Secret Heartache, where she insinuated romance between Harry and Hermione. Readers remember the ridicule, but few stop to acknowledge the effort required to gather the material. She observed gestures others missed, slipping through shadows, listening where she was not welcome. In a world that punished curiosity with hexes, she embodied the phrase, snooping at your own peril. Indeed, the peril was real. Had Moody, Snape, or McGonagall discovered a beetle crawling near the champion's tents, Skeeter might have met with a hex that ended her career. Or worse. The Ministry, too, was a perilous ground. Think of the Department of Mysteries, a place so tightly guarded that only select unspeakables walked its halls. Though Rita may not have penetrated its deepest secrets, she lingered near enough to gather whispers. In a time when the very air of the Ministry was thick with suspicion, she fluttered unnoticed, piecing together fragments of intrigue. One wrong movement, one suspicious wizard glancing down, and her unregistered animagus secret would have unraveled. Her freedom, her livelihood, and possibly her life in Azkaban were always a breath away from collapse. Yet she returned, time and again, penning lines that, while dripping with venom, proved her remarkable persistence. It is crucial to view Rita Skeeter through this dual lens of scandal and bravery. Like a war correspondent chasing stories on battlefields, she entered zones of danger with nothing but her quill. Only, instead of honoring her subjects, she weaponized her words against them. Still, her role bore a resemblance to that of journalists who risk lives to bring home stories from war. When she wrote about Harry Dumbledore or Ludo Bagman, her intent was not truth but sensation. Yet her willingness to endure risk for the sake of her stories deserves a reluctant acknowledgement. Even her confrontation with Hermione in Goblet of Fire reveals her resilience. Caught, trapped in a jar, stripped of her advantage, Skeeter still spat venom with her words. There was no trembling admission, no collapse into pleading. Instead, she hissed threats, demanded her release, and remained defiant despite being utterly powerless. That defiance shows the core of her character, unyielding, sharp, unwilling to bend even when crushed. Bravery does not always roar in noble acts. Sometimes it simmers in the refusal to surrender identity even under humiliation. Comparisons with Gilderoy Lockhart are illuminating. Lockhart, who loved fame above all, fled danger whenever it presented itself, fabricating stories to replace real heroism. Rita, however, did not fabricate her presence at events. She risked her safety to witness them. She may have exaggerated, twisted, and embellished, but her attendance was real. She stood near the dragon pit, lurked near the champions' tents, hovered close to government secrets. In this sense, Rita Skeeter lived her stories in ways Lockhart never dared, making her courage genuine even if her intentions were corrupt. Her ambition also paints her as braver than many give credit for. Most wizards lived quietly, following routines, never seeking attention. Rita craved the spotlight but went further. She fought for it, clawed for it, endangered herself to remain at the center of conversation. She wielded her animagus form as a weapon of journalism, taking the sort of risks that many respectable witches and wizards would have never considered. It is telling that even when Hermione forced her into silence for a year, Skeeter did not crumble. She returned later with the same fiery hunger, writing exposés for the Quibbler when it suited her. Such resilience testifies to a daring spirit not easily extinguished. We must also remember that Rita Skeeter lived in a time when Voldemort's shadow loomed. Fear silenced many. People avoided speaking his name, avoided confronting uncomfortable truths. Rita, in her own twisted fashion, defied silence. She may have chosen gossip over prophecy, scandal over revelation, but she never retreated into anonymity. Instead, she risked her body and her reputation to remain visible, audible, relevant. And in a world where silence equaled safety, such visibility was itself an act of bravery. Her name may forever be synonymous with scandal and her words with cruelty, but Rita Skeeter forces us to question the nature of courage. Is it only noble when tied to noble deeds, or can it also exist in flawed, self-serving actions? Rita showed that bravery could be sharp-edged, self-centered, and manipulative, yet still undeniable. She may never be loved as Harry, admired as Dumbledore, or respected as McGonagall. But perhaps when we consider the risks she embraced, the dangers she sought out, and the resilience she displayed, we might soften our view. Rita Skeeter was more than a scandalous quill. She was a daring soul who stepped where others dared not, and that, in its way, is worthy of reluctant warmth. Number 19, she reflected the flaws of the system. Of all the figures who wander through the margins of the Harry Potter saga, Rita Skeeter is among the most despised. Yet to simply dismiss her as a parasitic gossip monger is to overlook the strange mirror she holds up to wizarding society. Skeeter's poisoning quill, her animagus spying, and her relentless appetite for scandal are not the quirks of one rotten journalist alone. They are the symptoms of a system hungry for sensation, eager for easy narratives, and willing to destroy reputations to feed its collective appetite. To view Skeeter with unyielding disgust is comfortable, but to treat her with even a sliver of warmth is to admit she revealed what many preferred to hide: the audience's complicity. She did not create the weaknesses of Wizarding Britain, she exposed them and profited from them. When Skeeter first appears in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, she quickly makes her presence felt at the Triwizard Tournament. Harry, freshly chosen as the fourth champion, becomes her primary subject. In their first interview, she scribbles furiously with her quick quotes quill, which distorts every word he utters into melodrama. Tears fill those startlingly green eyes as our conversation turns to the parents he can barely remember, she writes, despite Harry never once crying. Readers laugh at the exaggeration, but the line stings because the Daily Prophet printed it for an audience eager to consume pity as entertainment. Rita simply supplied what the public craved. In this way, she is not a monster in isolation, but a performer in a grander circus. The circulation of her articles reminds us of how quickly Wizarding Society latches onto stories that flatter their prejudices or fears. When Harry insists that Voldemort has returned at the end of Goblet of Fire, Skeeter's previous pieces depicting him as unstable, attention-seeking and fragile make the claim easier to dismiss. Cornelius Fudge, the Minister of Magic, is only too happy to rely on her reporting to support his narrative that everything is fine. If Harry is a disturbed teenager rather than a truth-teller, then the Ministry need not act. Skeeter's quill becomes a shield for the government, and the Daily Prophet turns from a paper of record into a tool of denial. Skeeter exposes how institutions invite such writers into their orbit when it suits their interests. One cannot forget how Hermione Granger reacts to Skeeter's methods. Hermione despises her manipulation and eventually blackmails her into silence, imprisoning Skeeter in a glass jar while she is in beetle form. This revenge feels satisfying, but it also points to something darker. Hermione recognizes that Skeeter is dangerous precisely because people believe her. Without the public's appetite, Rita's words would vanish into nothing. The girl who values truth above all is forced to admit that in the world of wizarding news, truth is secondary to entertainment. That realization unsettles Hermione as much as Rita's personal malice. Consider also Skeeter's treatment of Hagrid during Goblet of Fire. She paints him as a violent half-giant unfit for teaching, using half-truths and innuendo to stir up prejudice. The wizarding public seizes on the scandal, forcing Hagrid into hiding. In that moment, Skeeter demonstrates how prejudice waits just below the surface of respectability. Her article does not create bigotry, it taps into an existing vein and amplifies it. Wizards who had smiled at Hagrid now whisper behind his back. Skeeter becomes the catalyst, but the shame belongs to those who allowed themselves to be swayed by ink on parchment. What makes Skeeter fascinating is her survival instinct. She knows exactly which words will sting, which stories will sell, and which reputations can be sacrificed without consequence. In a world where power often silences dissent, Skeeter thrives by attacking those who are not yet untouchable. She can smear a teenage champion, a half-giant teacher, or a celebrity Quidditch star like Victor Crumb because their pain becomes fodder for circulation. If we despise her, perhaps it is because she reminds us of how fragile reputations truly are when audiences prefer sensation to compassion. Skeeter's greatest unmasking of society comes during the Order of the Phoenix. While the Ministry insists Harry is lying, the Prophet fills its pages with quiet mockery, portraying him as unstable. Skeeter, silenced temporarily by Hermione's blackmail, does not write during this time, and yet the same dynamic remains. The absence of Skeeter proves the point. She is not the disease, but the symptom. Even without her, the paper finds ways to mock and diminish Harry. Rita is simply the most vivid embodiment of what the system already does. The structures of wizarding journalism are built to satisfy power, not truth. When Dumbledore's death shakes the world in The Half-Blood Prince, Skeeter returns in full force. She publishes The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, a book timed perfectly to exploit grief. Readers gasp at revelations about Dumbledore's friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, his youthful ambition for the greater good, and his sister Ariana's tragic fate. Many fans of Dumbledore recoil in horror, angry at Skeeter's invasion of privacy. But once again, it is not Rita who makes the revelations powerful, it is the audience that consumes them. Wizards want their heroes spotless, and when Skeeter shatters that illusion, they rage at her instead of acknowledging the complexity of their idols. She sells scandal because people buy it. The Dumbledore biography raises a deeper question about Skeeter's role as a chronicler of uncomfortable truths. Much of what she uncovers is distorted, exaggerated, or told with malicious intent. Yet within her sensationalism, kernels of truth remain. Dumbledore's past with Grindelwald is genuine. His secrecy about Ariana is real. Skeeter's narrative is unkind, but it is not wholly false. Her book forces Harry to wrestle with the possibility that even his mentor had flaws, and in that sense, Rita compels growth. Society loathes her, not because she invents lies out of thin air, but because she forces them to look at the cracks they refuse to see. To view Skeeter with warmth is not to excuse her cruelty, but to recognize her as a necessary foil. In any society, individuals who exploit public weakness reveal the fractures beneath the surface. Rita is a scavenger, but scavengers thrive where corruption and decay are already present. Her success proves that the wizarding world is not as noble, tolerant, or truthful as it pretends. Her stories are consumed because readers, ministers, and ordinary witches alike secretly prefer them to the dull complexity of reality. Even Harry himself benefits from Skeeter in unexpected ways. When he gives his story exclusively to the Quibbler under Luna Lovegood's father, it gains traction precisely because people are already accustomed to consuming scandal. Skeeter's manipulation inadvertently paves the way for alternative narratives to find their audience. By saturating the public with gossip, she opens the possibility that countercultural voices might slip through. In this sense, her worst qualities lay bare the mechanisms of power, making resistance possible. We might also remember that Skeeter's career is not destroyed even after her Animagus secret is revealed. She continues to write, continues to publish, and remains present in wizarding media. Society does not exile her. Instead, it tolerates her because, despite the scorn, readers keep buying. This fact proves the complicity of the public more strongly than any defense. If Rita Skeeter were truly despised, she would vanish. That she endures suggests people still crave the very poison they claim to reject. Ultimately, Skeeter is the shadow of wizarding Britain's conscience. She is the figure who shows that power, prejudice, and public hunger for entertainment can outweigh compassion or truth. To hate her is easy. To acknowledge that she reveals the flaws of her readers is uncomfortable. Yet to grant her a sliver of warmth is to admit she is not wholly the villain of her story. She is also its mirror, reflecting the failures of her world with every malicious flourish of her quill. Perhaps the reason Harry Potter himself becomes a symbol of truth is precisely because Skeeter exists to embody the opposite. He speaks what he has seen, even when no one believes him. She twists what she hears, even when everyone buys it. Their opposition is not merely personal, but systemic, a battle between reality and spectacle. And yet, without Skeeter's distortions, Harry's eventual triumph of truth would carry less weight. She is the dark backdrop against which honesty shines brighter. The bitterness of wizarding society towards Skeeter therefore tells us more about the audience than about her. If wizards despised her entirely, they would refuse to read her work. Instead, they sneer at her while flipping each page eagerly. In this contradiction lies her power. Rita Skeeter's flaw was never just her quill or her ambition. It was her uncanny ability to show a society its own hunger for scandal, prejudice, and distraction. And if they hated her, perhaps it was because, deep down, they recognized themselves in her mirror. Number 20, she brought variety into the plot. Rita Skeeter always entered the Harry Potter story like an unexpected storm, full of sparks and disruption, and it was precisely this effect that made her indispensable. Where most characters worked to support Harry or stood as his enemies in clearly drawn lines of conflict, Rita blurred those divisions and forced both the characters and readers to experience frustration, humor, and unease at once. She was not a dark wizard, nor was she a teacher, nor a student, nor even a loyal ally. Instead, she was a journalist with a poisonous quill, a character who thrived on bending the truth until it broke. In that bending, she brought an energy that prevented the narrative from sinking into predictability. Rowling, through Skeeter, reminded us that chaos can come not only from the grand battles of magic, but also from the small, irritating ways that words twist reality. Take the Triwizard Tournament in the Goblet of Fire. The stakes were already high, with life-threatening tasks and the looming return of Voldemort. Yet Rita Skeeter added an entirely different layer of tension. She was not part of the competition, but she managed to make Harry's experience even harder, simply by misrepresenting him in print. The infamous article in the Daily Prophet painted Harry as a disturbed and dangerous boy who was prone to fits and visions, and that false image spread like wildfire. Tear-stained and trembling, she confided that the famous Harry Potter is no stranger to nightmares, Skeeter wrote. About Hermione, twisting an innocent conversation into a scandal. This did not move the plot forward in the same way Voldemort's schemes did, but it complicated the emotional weight of the story. Readers saw how the hero could be hurt not just by curses, but by words, and how damaging public perception could become. What Rita contributed was diversity of conflict. Without her, much of Harry's struggle would have rested solely on magical duels, dark wizards, and internal doubts. She demonstrated that the non-magical tools of gossip and misinformation could cut just as sharply. The world Rowling created was rich and layered, and Skeeter made sure it felt alive with the uncomfortable truth that society does not always stand behind its heroes. In fact, it often turns on them for why. Entertainment. She embodied the trivial cruelty of human behavior, and though that quality was irritating, it added depth. Readers may have rolled their eyes or clenched their fists at her, but her presence prevented the story from feeling overly neat or idealized. Her personality, too, stood out. With her scarlet nails, her quick smile, and her enchanted green quill, Rita was drawn with the flamboyance of someone who loved to be the center of attention. She was a caricature of tabloid journalism, but she was also believable. In every society, there are figures who exploit half-truths and thrive on drama. Rowling's decision to make Skeeter an animagus who could transform into a beetle emphasized this quality even further. The beetle was both intrusive and small, sneaking into private spaces to gather secrets. That choice of animal was not accidental. It highlighted how Rita made herself unavoidable, crawling into cracks where no one wanted her. She was ridiculous, but she was also clever, and that blend made her fascinating. Consider her treatment of Hermione Granger. Skeeter's article about Hermione allegedly playing with the hearts of both Harry and Victor Crumb was not just annoying. It changed the dynamics of relationships at Hogwarts. Hermione suddenly received hate mail, including a box of poisoned sweets. Here, Skeeter's interference demonstrated how words on a page could materialize into real harm. It also showed the strength of Hermione, who, despite being furious, refused to let Skeeter control her life. Without Skeeter, Hermione's resilience might not have been tested in that particular way. Skeeter became a mirror against which characters revealed hidden qualities: Harry's temper, Hermione's determination, and Ron's awkward jealousy. Skeeter also served as an injection of comic relief. Her exaggerated style, her ridiculous claims, and her over-the-top interviews often broke the heavy tension of the books. In The Goblet of Fire, while dragons and mermaids threatened Harry's life, Skeeter managed to make readers laugh at her absurdity. She turned every scene into a stage for her quill, making wild exaggerations that bordered on parody. When she described Harry and Hermione as young lovers sitting by the lake, it was so far from reality that the sheer absurdity gave the story texture. Humor, even of the frustrating kind, softened the sharp edges of the darker chapters and reminded readers that chaos could also be entertaining. Her influence extended beyond the pages of her articles. She made readers question the reliability of information in the wizarding world. Was the Daily Prophet truly an authority, or was it as flawed as any other publication? When people in the wizarding world blindly accepted Skeeter's words, the story exposed how propaganda and media manipulation function. This was not only a fictional lesson, but also a reflection of real life. Rowling used Skeeter to show young readers that information should not always be trusted at face value, that even celebrated newspapers can mislead. Without Skeeter, the series would have lost that satirical lens on media and its power. Her return in the Order of the Phoenix further cemented her role as a balancing force. While Harry was painted as a liar by the Ministry and the press, it was ironic that Hermione forced Skeeter to tell the truth. Using the threat of exposing her illegal animagus form, Hermione blackmailed Skeeter into writing Harry's version of events for the Quibbler. This twist turned Skeeter into an unlikely ally, demonstrating once again how her presence generated unexpected turns in the story. "He who must not be named returns," screamed the article in the Quibbler, and suddenly Skeeter's words became a weapon for justice rather than chaos. This showed that even the most irritating character could become useful, that in a story about good and evil, the line between help and harm could blur. Skeeter's existence also emphasized the theme of reputation. Throughout the books, Harry's identity as the boy who lived weighed heavily on him, and Skeeter sharpened that struggle by constantly reshaping his public image. One moment he was a tragic orphan, the next a dangerous attention-seeker. This instability made Harry's journey more human, because real heroes are never universally adored. They are questioned, criticized, even mocked. Skeeter made sure Harry's fame came with a price, reminding readers that recognition and admiration are rarely simple. It is also worth noting how Skeeter's writing contrasted with other voices in the books, where Dumbledore spoke with wisdom, Sirius with passion, and Voldemort with menace. Skeeter spoke with falsity and charm. Her voice was unique, a different rhythm that made the story less uniform. Each time she appeared, the tone of the narrative shifted slightly, adding an element of performance. It was as if Rowling invited readers to watch a circus act in the middle of a war, and though we might groan at the noise, the spectacle was impossible to ignore. In retrospect, her presence gave the series balance between light and dark, between comedy and tragedy. When Cedric Diggory died, the grief was heavy and unrelenting, but just chapters before, Skeeter had been exaggerating Hermione's love life, making readers laugh. That alternation between tones made the darker moments hit harder, because the contrast reminded us of the fragile line between absurdity and horror. Rita Skeeter, annoying as she was part of that rhythm, helping Rowling orchestrate the emotional flow of the saga. Even her fashion, described as large, mannish hands with 2-inch nails painted crimson and square spectacles studded with rhinestones, had symbolic weight. She was the embodiment of artifice, of a world that cared more for appearance than substance. Her green quick quotes quill wrote with the same artificial flair, inventing details to make the story more attractive. She was not evil in the sense Voldemort was evil, but she was a parasite on truth, a reminder that corruption can take the form of something bright, polished, and entertaining. Ultimately, Rita Skeeter was one of the few characters who did not fit into a single category of ally or enemy. She floated between like a trickster figure. One day she tormented Harry, the next she reluctantly helped him. That ambiguity was valuable because it reflected the real world more closely. People are not always purely good or bad, sometimes they are simply self-serving. And in her selfishness, Skeeter enriched the narrative by refusing to play a single note. She was unpredictable, and unpredictability kept the story alive. It is easy to hate Rita Skeeter, to dismiss her as a nuisance, but that would mean overlooking the function she played. She was the spark of irritation that stirred laughter, the reminder that words can wound as deeply as curses, and the symbol of how society often feeds on scandal. Without her, the saga of Harry Potter would still have been grand, but it would have lost an essential shade of colour. For all her flaws, Rita Skeeter gave the story texture, and in her chaos, she became one of the most effective instruments of Rowling's art. Number 21. She had incredible persistence. Rita Skeeter is remembered in the wizarding world for her biting quill, her exaggerated stories, and her talent for making even the most innocent detail sound scandalous. Yet, beneath the surface of sensationalism there lies a trait that cannot be denied: her relentless persistence. In the fourth book, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, this quality is revealed again and again, and while it may be easy to despise her for intruding on Harry's life, it is equally possible to admire her for the sheer force of will that drove her to uncover every possible story. She was a woman who never gave up, and in a world where secrets often held immense power, that level of determination carried its own kind of value. Her obsession with Harry became most visible during the Triwizard Tournament, when she first cornered him for an interview he had no desire to give. The words in the book are striking. The quick quotes, Quill was dancing across the parchment, recording every exaggerated sigh and dramatic pause Rita inserted into Harry's story. What is striking is not only her ability to twist his words, but the energy with which she pursued the chance to get them at all. Harry was a boy who wanted nothing more than to be left alone, yet Rita made it her mission to drag him into the spotlight. She did not wait for permission. She created the opportunity herself, sneaking into spaces, charming people, and pushing through barriers that would have stopped a less determined journalist. In her mind, a story that mattered had to be written no matter how much resistance stood in the way. Persistence for Rita was not an occasional effort, but a constant state of being. Even when she was banned from Hogwarts grounds by Professor Dumbledore himself, she refused to see that as a final word. The text makes it clear Rita Skeeter had been warned off the grounds, but her articles continued to appear, filled with details no one else could have gathered. The implication was obvious: she had found a way around the restrictions. Later, we learn that her ability to become an unregistered animagus gave her unprecedented access, yet the remarkable point lies in her attitude. Rules, warnings, even magical barriers were not enough to curb her. In the darker corners of her behavior lies something admirable, a refusal to surrender when faced with authority. This same quality appears when Rita turns her gaze to Hermione Granger. Hermione's righteous anger and disgust at being portrayed as Harry's supposed love interest could not deter Skeeter. The article describing her as Harry Potter's secret heartthrob was infuriating to Hermione, yet Rita did not back away from her prey simply because of outrage. On the contrary, outrage seemed to fuel her determination. The more resistance she met, the more she dug her quill into the page. While this behavior is far from noble, it mirrors the grit of those who refuse to accept defeat. Hermione herself, years later, would demonstrate a similar refusal to give up, though hers was directed toward justice rather than gossip. In this strange symmetry, Rita's persistence reflects a quality that even her greatest critics share. There is also the way Rita handled rejection. Harry often tried to avoid her, slipping past her, or ignoring her questions. Most journalists would take the hint and move on to someone more willing. Rita did the opposite. She waited, she plotted, she disguised herself, and she returned again and again until she got what she wanted. In The Daily Prophet, she managed to publish pieces full of exclusive details, some of which could only have been obtained through methods that would terrify most. The reality is that Rita's determination allowed her to control the narrative of Harry's life during the tournament. She shaped public opinion not by waiting for easy opportunities, but by creating them. This hunger to achieve her goal at any cost is what set her apart. The persistence of Rita Skeeter was so pronounced that even the most guarded figures could not escape her. Ludo Bagman, the ministry official drowning in gambling debts, found himself exposed in her articles despite his attempts to maintain a cheerful exterior. His protests did not silence her pen, nor did his official status shield him from her determination. For Rita, titles meant little. What mattered was the story, and she would pursue it until it was written. This relentless approach brought her both enemies and fame, and it is impossible not to recognize the strength of will that allowed her to go where others dared not. Rita's writing about Hagrid offers another example. When she discovered his giant heritage, she seized upon it with ferocity, exposing him in the harshest possible terms. The cruelty of her words cannot be overlooked, yet the way she obtained that information highlights her tenacity. Few people in Hogwarts would have dared to reveal something so personal, yet Rita managed to secure it. Her persistence in digging into the private lives of others gave her power, and she wielded it with a mixture of brilliance and recklessness. For Hagrid it was devastating, but for readers of her work it was proof of her ability to uncover truths no matter how deeply they were buried. The complexity of Rita's persistence emerges even more in The Order of the Phoenix, when Hermione turns the tables on her. Hermione blackmails Rita into writing an honest account of Voldemort's return, something no one else dared publish. At first, Rita resists, but her eventual agreement reveals that her persistence can be redirected. She still writes the article with the same determination, producing a piece for the Quibbler that becomes one of the most important truths of the era. In this moment, her relentless drive to write a story collides with a cause greater than gossip. It shows that her persistence is not inherently evil. It is the use of it that defines its impact. The quote from that episode is telling. Skeeter's hand was shaking as she wrote, but she did not stop, not even when Hermione leaned over to check each line. Despite the pressure, the humiliation of being blackmailed, and the discomfort of writing against her own instincts, Rita's quill moved forward. This is the purest expression of her character. When pushed into a corner, she did not crumble. She continued to write. It may not have been the article she wanted, but it was an article that only she could craft with such flair and detail. Even under duress, persistence defined her. In considering Rita Skeeter's role, one must reflect on what persistence means in the wizarding world. Harry's persistence helped him survive countless battles. Hermione's persistence helped her master every spell, and Ron's persistence helped him overcome insecurities to become a true hero. Rita's persistence, though directed toward the sensational, belonged to the same family of qualities. It was the engine that drove her forward regardless of resistance. While others might see obstacles, Rita saw challenges. That made her dangerous, but it also made her remarkable. It is easy to dislike Rita for the harm she caused, yet when looking closely, her unyielding drive is the very thing that many of the heroes also possessed. The difference lay in intention. Harry fought for truth and survival. Rita fought for headlines. Still, the method, the unwillingness to accept no as an answer, is a trait shared by those who ultimately change the course of history. Rita's persistence may have been misused, but it was persistence all the same, and it deserves recognition. When Harry later looked back on the chaos of his 4th year, it is difficult not to imagine that he remembered Rita's role with both anger and grudging respect. She embodied the storm of unwanted attention that followed him, yet she also demonstrated how far their determination can take a person. Rita Skeeter's articles had spread through the wizarding world like wildfire, the book notes, and this wildfire existed only because she fanned it without rest. She was tireless in her pursuit, and the flames she created burned brightly. The wizarding world, filled with dark wizards, hidden societies, and dangerous secrets, has always rewarded those who persist. In this context, Rita Skeeter's relentlessness fits perfectly. She may not have been a hero, but she was a fighter in her own way. She fought not with wands, but with words, not with spells, but with sentences. She carved her path with the determination of someone who refused to let go. Even those who despise her must acknowledge that there is something admirable in such an unwavering spirit. In the end, Rita Skeeter's persistence makes her more than a caricature of gossip. It makes her an emblem of what happens when determination is left unchecked, when it is directed without conscience, but with absolute commitment. Harry may have suffered under her words, Hermione may have raged against her, and Hagrid may have wept because of her revelations, but all of them stood against a woman who simply did not stop. To look at her persistence is to see a mirror of the very qualities that shaped the heroes, and this is why, even if only in the faintest way, it is possible to treat her with a touch more warmth. Number 22, she could create legends. Rita Skeeter remains one of the most polarizing figures in the Harry Potter saga, a character many readers dismissed as malicious, unethical, and opportunistic. Yet when one looks closer, there is an undeniable artistry in the way she wove her stories, transforming ordinary news into captivating tales that compelled readers to continue turning the page. Harry Potter himself, though a frequent victim of her quill, is in many ways the reason fans can learn to see Skeeter with a touch of warmth, if not admiration. His experiences reveal that she possessed a storyteller's instinct, a talent for creating legends that blurred the boundary between fact and myth, and this gift allowed her to capture the collective imagination of the wizarding world. It is easy to forget that Skeeter's writing had an intoxicating pull, even for those who knew she was distorting reality. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, she turned Harry from a troubled young wizard into a tragic hero with a heartache that refuses to heal. This line, exaggerated to the point of parody, appeared in her profile of the boy during the Triwizard Tournament. She painted his scar not as a mark of Voldemort's curse, but as a symbol of endless romantic suffering, suggesting that Harry, barely 14, was a lonely soul searching for love. Readers knew it was absurd, and Harry himself groaned in humiliation, but the phrasing stuck. It was dramatic, theatrical, and it gave him an aura of myth. Even when one rolled their eyes, one could not forget the image she conjured. The same pattern emerges with her treatment of Hermione Granger in that very year. In a series of articles, Skeeter spun Hermione into a dangerous femme fatale, a scarlet woman who toyed with the hearts of both Harry and Victor Crumb. Miss Granger, a plain but ambitious girl, seems to have ensnared the famous Harry Potter and the Bulgarian Seeker, Skeeter wrote. The accusation was cruel, false, and deeply unfair to Hermione, yet the storytelling power of the article was undeniable. It gave the tournament a subplot of romantic rivalry and betrayal, transforming a sporting event into a saga of passions and jealousies. Readers of the Daily Prophet were swept away, gossiping as if the lives of teenagers had become a Shakespearean drama. Hermione's tears and Harry's indignation could not erase the fact that Skeeter had successfully captivated an audience. Her ability to frame individuals as heroes or villains was unmatched. Consider her portrait of Ludo Bagman, head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Skeeter presented him as a man of questionable morals, linked to shady financial dealings and potential ties with the criminal underworld. Although Bagman was not a villain in the traditional sense, Skeeter transformed him into one on the page, describing his smug demeanor and suspicious evasions. In reality, Bagman was more foolish than dangerous, but Skeeter's narrative made him larger than life. Through her pen, a bumbling bureaucrat became a potential conspirator, the kind of man one whispered about over breakfast. This is what separates Skeeter from ordinary journalists in the wizarding world. She did not merely report, she dramatized. Her stories were designed as spectacles, and her readers were her audience. Even those who distrusted her could not resist reading her words. Dumbledore himself once reminded Harry, "The truth is a beautiful and terrible thing, and should therefore be treated with great caution." Skeeter inverted this principle. To her, truth was clay to be moulded, something that could be stretched, reshaped, or entirely reimagined if it made the story more enthralling. The result was dangerous, certainly, but it was also magnetic. Harry Potter's role in all this is crucial, because it was through his eyes that readers first experienced the emotional weight of her articles. When Harry read Skeeter's words about himself, he felt both anger and confusion. He wondered why people believed such nonsense, yet he could not deny that the words had power. They changed the way classmates looked at him, how strangers whispered about him, how his very identity seemed to shift depending on the narrative circulating in the Prophet. Skeeter's quill did not just report events, it shaped the reality in which Harry lived. The boy who already bore the burden of being the boy who lived now had to carry the fictional legends Skeeter wrapped around him. And yet, for all the trouble she caused, one cannot dismiss the craftsmanship in her writing. She used rhythm, hyperbole, and vivid imagery in ways that rivaled the best authors of wizarding literature. There is a passage in Goblet of Fire where Harry reflects bitterly on Skeeter's descriptions of his scar. She had claimed he was constantly rubbing it, a look of pain and longing in his eyes. Harry admitted the sheer absurdity of it, but one senses that even he recognized the seductive nature of the narrative. She gave his life the structure of an epic, and while he hated the falsehood, he understood why readers devoured it. It is also important to remember that Skeeter was writing for an audience that craved legends. The wizarding world was a place where myths and reality overlapped daily, where portraits talked, ghosts roamed, and magical creatures blurred the line between fairy tale and fact. In such a world, Skeeter's exaggerations felt natural. When she turned Hermione into a tragic temptress, or Harry into a star-crossed hero, she was not introducing fantasy into reality, she was heightening reality into legend. Her readers did not necessarily need to believe every word. They needed to be entertained, to feel the thrill of inhabiting a world larger and more dramatic than their own. The irony is that Skeeter's talent for myth-making occasionally revealed truths that straightforward reporting could not. Her article on Albus Dumbledore after his death in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows shocked readers with its tone, exposing unflattering aspects of the great wizard's youth. The details about his friendship with Gellert Grindelwald and the tragedy of his sister Ariana were sensationalized, but beneath the exaggeration lay fragments of uncomfortable truth. Harry himself, though furious, realized that Skeeter's storytelling forced him to confront questions he might otherwise have avoided. Here again, her artistry became undeniable. By presenting Dumbledore as a flawed legend rather than a saint, she compelled readers to wrestle with the complexity of their hero. In this sense, Skeeter's work mirrors the very nature of history. History is rarely a simple account of events, it is a narrative constructed by those who record it. Skeeter may have twisted facts to suit her own purposes, but she also demonstrated how stories define reputations, shape memories, and determine how people are remembered. Just as Harry would always be remembered as the boy who lived, Skeeter ensured that those around him were remembered not as ordinary people, but as characters in a living saga. For readers of the wizarding world, her stories became part of their collective imagination, lingering long after the events themselves had passed. Perhaps what makes Skeeter most compelling is the reminder that storytelling itself is a kind of power. Voldemort wielded fear, Dumbledore wielded wisdom, but Skeeter wielded words. She was not noble, and she certainly was not kind, but she understood something fundamental. People hunger for stories more than they hunger for facts. Her gift was to feed that hunger. Even if her articles angered those they targeted, they left an imprint on the world. Without her, Harry's legend might have remained static, a flat repetition of his survival as a child. With her, he became a figure of constant reinvention, a hero, a victim, a romantic lead, a tragic symbol, each identity crafted by the flourish of her quill. One could even argue that Skeeter, unintentionally, made Harry stronger. Every time she distorted his life, he was forced to confront who he truly was, to separate his reality from her fiction. When classmates whispered about Hermione, or when strangers stared at his scar with new fascination, Harry had to find the resilience to define himself. Skeeter's legends, though infuriating, pushed him to assert his own story against the backdrop of her fabrications. In a paradoxical way, her dishonesty compelled Harry to embrace authenticity more fiercely. This duality, harmful yet compelling, dishonest yet artistic, is why one can feel a grudging warmth toward Rita Skeeter. She was manipulative, yes, but she was also a creator of worlds. She gave Wizarding Britain the kind of drama that echoed the grandeur of folklore. Just as the tales of Beedle the Bard carried morals hidden within exaggeration, Skeeter's writing carried entertainment and at times uncomfortable truths hidden within distortion. It is a talent that cannot be ignored, even if it cannot be fully forgiven. To read Skeeter is to be reminded of the blurred boundary between journalism and literature, between truth and myth. She represents the seductive danger of storytelling, but also its beauty. In her hands, even Harry Potter, already a boy of legend, became something more. A character in a never-ending tale, part reality, part invention, forever remembered not just for what he did, but for the stories told about him. That is Rita Skeeter's legacy, and it is why Harry Potter himself becomes the key to understanding her. Through his struggles, readers discover that to love, or at least to feel warmth towards Skeeter, is to acknowledge the undeniable power of stories, even when they are written with a quick quotes quill. Number 23, she was independent. Rita Skeeter is often remembered as the ruthless journalist who thrived on scandal, spinning stories that exaggerated, twisted, and sometimes outright fabricated details about the lives of wizards and witches. Yet within the venom of her quill lies something often overlooked, her fierce independence. Unlike many figures in the Harry Potter world who bowed to pressure from the Ministry of Magic or to the influence of powerful families, Rita insisted on operating according to her own terms. This is not to excuse her questionable ethics, but to recognize that her refusal to be controlled gave her a peculiar kind of strength, one that deserves more nuanced reflection. One of the clearest examples of Rita's independence comes during the events of the Triwizard Tournament in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. When other reporters might have followed the official narrative given by Ludo Bagman or Barty Crouch Sr., Rita consistently carved her own path. She refused to parrot the official story and instead hunted for details that would make her reporting unique. "The boy who lived, or the boy who lies," she wrote, with her poisonous insinuation that Harry had manipulated events to seek fame. Her methods were cruel, but the choice to step outside the official line was significant. She didn't simply recycle ministry-approved statements. She wrote what she wanted, regardless of the backlash. In the wizarding world, where conformity was often demanded, especially during times of political unrest, Rita's independence was striking. Consider Cornelius Fudge, who was obsessed with controlling the narrative around Voldemort's return in the Order of the Phoenix. The Daily Prophet bent completely to his will, publishing article after article that painted Harry and Dumbledore as liars. Rita, however, was not included in this chorus. She had already been pushed out of mainstream journalism because of her questionable practices, yet when Hermione forced her to write Harry's side of the story for the Quibbler, Rita agreed. Her willingness to step away from the ministry-controlled press and publish the truth, even if under coercion, was a reminder that she was not someone easily tamed by authority. The article Rita eventually wrote for the Quibbler became pivotal. For once, she used her talents not to sensationalize, but to shine a light on what others were too afraid to print. Hermione's pressure forced her hand, but her independence allowed the article to exist in the first place. She had no loyalty to Fudge, no allegiance to the Ministry, and no fear of betraying their approved storyline. When Harry read her words, raw and filled with his testimony, they had an enormous impact on public opinion. As the text says, "It's making a great difference having it out there," Harry told Hermione. Even in this unusual alliance, Rita's independence made her a dangerous weapon for truth, though it was wielded reluctantly. It is important to notice that Rita's independence came from self-interest as much as from courage. She thrived on controversy and relished the ability to provoke, but that very quality meant she was never a servant of the Ministry. Unlike Dolores Umbridge, who worshipped rules and bowed to Fudge's authority, Rita Skeeter despised being muzzled. Her quick tongue and sharper quill made her unpredictable, and unpredictability is in itself a kind of freedom. In a society that often silenced dissent, she created her own space where she could not be ignored. Her animagus transformation into a beetle also underscored this spirit of independence. She chose to master this incredibly complex piece of magic and never registered it with the Ministry, keeping it as her personal secret weapon. This act of defiance alone demonstrated that Rita did not respect the structures of control designed by wizarding authorities. She believed in her right to observe, to infiltrate, and to write what she pleased, even if it meant breaking the law. That choice aligned her with the rebels of the wizarding world, not in intent, but in practice. She operated outside the lines drawn by those in power. Rita's independence becomes even more notable when we compare her to figures like Percy Weasley, who clung tightly to the Ministry's script in the name of order and ambition. While Percy read the prophet with absolute trust and dismissed Harry's warnings, Rita was always suspicious of authority. This distinction mattered. Percy lost his independence to climb the ladder, while Rita sacrificed respectability to preserve her autonomy. Between the two, only one maintained the power to speak without being owned, and that was Rita Skeeter. Of course, her independence also came with consequences. She was widely despised, distrusted, and ultimately blackmailed into silence by Hermione. But even under Hermione's control, her instinct to resist shone through. When coerced into interviewing Harry, she did not deliver a dull or cautious piece. Instead, she leaned into her dramatic flair, producing a riveting story that turned heads across the wizarding community. As Hermione put it, "She'll write it her way or not at all." Even with her hands tied, Rita managed to assert her voice. What makes Rita a figure to be treated more warmly is that her independence mirrored Harry's in an inverted way. Harry, too, refused to be controlled by the Ministry, especially when they attempted to silence him in his 5th year. The difference was that Harry resisted out of principle, while Rita resisted out of ego. Yet the core of independence, the refusal to be silenced, was present in both. When Dumbledore told Harry, "The truth is a beautiful and terrible thing and should therefore be treated with great caution," it resonated not only with Harry but also, ironically, with Rita, who lived by her own version of that creed. It is telling that in the Deathly Hallows, Rita is still writing, still publishing, and still unafraid of offending the powerful. Her biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore, was riddled with exaggerations and manipulations, but it was undeniably bold. At a time when Voldemort's forces were tightening their grip on the wizarding world, Rita dared to release a book questioning the legacy of the most respected wizard of the age. No Ministry decree, no Death Eater intimidation, no social expectation could silence her. She might have written for profit, but she also revealed a relentless determination to speak when others fell into fearful quiet. Rita's independence also reflects something essential about journalism itself. A free press, even when imperfect or scandalous, is preferable to one completely enslaved to government control. In her, we see the chaotic, dangerous, but vital role of the outsider who will not be silenced. She blurred the line between truth and spectacle, but she also reminded the wizarding world that words could never be fully controlled. In this way, she was part of the same resistance that Harry embodied, though she would never be noble enough to admit it. Rita's flaws are undeniable. She invaded privacy, she twisted facts, and she used her quill like a weapon. Yet in her refusal to obey, she demonstrated something rare. Even when cornered by Hermione, even when mocked by her peers, Rita never gave up her core identity as a writer who played by her own rules. She was not a puppet, and she was never truly owned by the Ministry. In her own distorted way, she valued freedom more than reputation, which made her both infuriating and admirable. Her independence is why Harry Potter himself became the cause to view Rita differently. Without Harry, she would have remained a caricature of journalistic corruption. With him, she became the vessel for one of the most important truths of the Wizarding War, the return of Voldemort. Harry gave her the chance to channel her independence into something that mattered. And although she did not do it out of altruism, the outcome proved her value. She was the kind of person who, even when unwilling, could never be silenced. When we look back, Rita Skeeter embodies the paradox of freedom. She was destructive and she was untrustworthy, but she was also fiercely resistant to control. In a world filled with sycophants, bureaucrats, and fearful wizards, her independence stood out. She may never be loved in the way Harry, Hermione, or Dumbledore are, but she represents something important nonetheless. To treat her with more warmth is not to forgive her sins, but to recognize that even in flawed hands, the spirit of independence is a spark worth keeping alive. Number 24. She always knew where the epicenter of events was. Rita Skeeter has often been painted in the darkest of colors, a journalist with a poisonous quill and a taste for sensationalism, but it is impossible to ignore that she was always at the center of the storm. She had an instinct, a kind of supernatural radar that placed her directly in the path of the greatest magical upheavals of her time. When Harry Potter stepped into the world's gaze during the Triwizard Tournament, Rita was already there, quill in hand, ready to turn fact into spectacle. For readers, this meant an insider's view of one of the most dangerous and memorable events in Hogwarts history, even if her words twisted truth into exaggeration. During the Triwizard Tournament, Skeeter became a near-constant presence. She reported on Harry's struggles with dragons and underwater merpeople, and though she famously manipulated the details, she kept her audience glued to every turn of the story. When she wrote that Harry cried before the dragon, it was a blatant falsehood, yet it created a sense of drama that even Ludo Bagman's official commentary could not rival. Without Skeeter, the public would have received only sanitized announcements from the Ministry. Instead, her articles made the tournament feel alive, unpredictable, and deeply human, even if Harry found them humiliating. Her distortions ironically highlighted the raw emotions that swirled beneath the surface of the contest. It was not only Harry who found himself in Skeeter's crosshairs. Hermione Granger, still a teenager trying to find her place, was portrayed by Rita as a Scarlet Woman, manipulating both Harry and Victor Crumb. The cruelty of the claim is undeniable, yet it cemented Skeeter's knack for sensing which connections mattered. She noticed the growing international attention on Crumb and saw how Hermione's closeness to him symbolized a deeper shift in alliances between Hogwarts and Durmstrang. Skeeter took threads others dismissed as trivial and spun them into the fabric of a larger narrative, one that readers could not ignore. Even if her conclusions were false, the angles she pursued often proved prophetic, for Hermione indeed became one of the central players in Voldemort's downfall. Her presence was not limited to school competitions. When the Ministry of Magic struggled to respond to Voldemort's return, Skeeter was once again nearby, sensing that history was unfolding. At first, she was silenced by her own reputation and by Hermione's clever blackmail over her unregistered animagus form. Yet when Dumbledore's army needed the truth to be told, who else could Hermione turn to? It was Skeeter who provided the written word that Luna Lovegood's father published in The Quibbler, an article that gave Harry a chance to tell the world he's back, Voldemort's back. In that moment, her pen, once seen as venomous, became the only instrument sharp enough to pierce the Ministry's wall of denial. Skeeter's knack for being at the epicenter meant that, despite her flaws, she became indispensable. The paradox of Rita Skeeter is that she thrived on scandal, yet consistently placed herself where truth was most urgent. She did not chase empty gossip about minor Quidditch players or obscure potion makers. She embedded herself where Harry, Dumbledore, and Voldemort's shadows collided. Her instincts were uncanny. Even her decision to attend the Yule Ball and report on teenage romances was not mere frivolity. She intuited that the alliances and tensions of that night would echo into the larger war. The appearance of Victor Crumb with Hermione, the isolation of Harry, and the jealousy boiling in Ron Weasley were all seeds of future conflicts and loyalties. Skeeter's words may have mocked, but her eye for significance was unmatched. Consider the way she hovered around the Ministry trials. When Harry attended the hearing for his supposed misuse of underage magic, Skeeter was conspicuously absent in print but not in spirit. The machinery of justice was already corrupt, but had Rita been allowed to write freely, she might have dragged the hypocrisy of Cornelius Fudge into the open earlier. Her absence at that trial reminds us that when Skeeter's voice was silenced, the truth became harder to see. It suggests that her role, uncomfortable though it was, functioned as a twisted form of accountability, a counterbalance to official lies. One cannot forget the biography, The Life and Lies of Albus Dumbledore. At first glance it seems like the pinnacle of exploitation, a cruel attempt to tarnish a beloved headmaster. Yet buried in its pages are details about Dumbledore's youthful friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, truths that even Harry himself did not know. While the tone was poisonous, the information proved critical to understanding Dumbledore's past and his vulnerabilities. Without Skeeter's persistence, the fragments of Ariana's tragedy and the Dumbledore family's secrets might never have reached light. Harry despised the book, but he was forced to wrestle with its revelations, and through that struggle he gained a more honest vision of the man who had guided him. Her quotes sparkle with both malice and accuracy. In Goblet of Fire, she famously described Harry as a boy with a tragic past, thrust once more into the spotlight he never sought. While the words were intended to draw pity laced with scandal, they were not entirely wrong. Harry was indeed a reluctant hero, constantly pushed into battles he never asked for. Rita Skeeter exaggerated the tears and invented the melodrama, but beneath her lies sat a shard of truth that many refused to articulate so bluntly. That is perhaps the most disquieting aspect of her work. She exaggerated, yet her exaggerations always curved back toward reality. It is worth asking why Skeeter so consistently knew where the action was. Was it only luck, or did her unregistered animagus ability as a beetle grant her unmatched access? While Harry and Hermione tried to outwit the Ministry, Skeeter in insect form crawled across windowsills, perched on statues, and listened at keyholes. This illicit advantage may explain her uncanny timing, but it also gave her a strange omniscience. Readers could be disgusted by her methods, but they were also drawn to the secrets she uncovered. Every society needs those who slip into shadows to extract hidden truths, and Skeeter embodied that dangerous role. The reactions she provoked also reveal her importance. Hermione's fury, Harry's humiliation, and Dumbledore's cool detachment all testified that Skeeter mattered. They would not have reacted so strongly to someone irrelevant. Even Voldemort, though never directly quoted by her, existed in the spaces her stories circled. Every sensational headline added to the atmosphere of fear and fascination in which the Dark Lord thrived. By documenting the tremors of the wizarding world, Skeeter amplified the tension that prepared readers for the quake. Her style was poisonous, but undeniably alive. She wielded words as weapons, coating them with sarcasm and venom, but the very sharpness forced people to pay attention. Where the Daily Prophet's official announcements lulled the public into apathy, Skeeter jolted them awake. One could argue that her exaggerations were a form of prophecy, her lies a mirror that reflected the wizarding world's hidden truths. A world without her words would have been quieter, but perhaps also blinder. The scorn directed at her by Harry and his friends may actually reveal a deeper truth about Rita Skeeter's role in their story. They hated her because she exposed their vulnerabilities, dragged their secrets into public light, and stripped away their control of the narrative. Yet history often depends on those who refuse to let heroes curate their own image. Skeeter was messy, self-serving, and untrustworthy, but she documented what others feared to write. She became, in her own twisted way, a chronicler of an era. To look back on Rita Skeeter with warmth may feel unnatural, but she offered readers something invaluable: perspective. Through her exaggerations, scandals, and half-truths, she kept Harry Potter from becoming a simple, sanitized tale. She forced us to grapple with the contradictions of heroes and the flaws of leaders. Most of all, she was there, always there, when history turned its sharpest corners. The dragon's roar, the courtroom's judgment, the resurrection of Voldemort, the shadowed past of Dumbledore. Rita Skeeter's quill scratched through them all, ensuring that even in distortion, the story could never be silenced.